It's in the media space and made absolutely clear. The presidency has confirmed the sack of dozens of persons appointed in the office of the vice president. Professor Yemi Osinbajo, the senior special assistant to the president on media and publicity, Mr. Garba Shehu gave reasons for the action in a statement on Friday. What does this mean to the person of the vice president whose office weeks ago was accused of misappropriation of the Trader Money SIP program in many states? What's next for the vice president? Will the anti-agency, graft agencies also move in to try to arrest the situation there? Data feeds are coming through in one place simultaneously on all our social media platforms, channelstv.com and on youtube.com/channels, where you can follow us right now on m.channelstv.com and on Facebook as well. We've got all our platforms and social media covered. Be part of the show. Tweet at Gimba Umar CTV. Use the hashtag State of the Nation. Let's get your thoughts in. In the meantime, Professor Yemi Osinbajo is visiting Niamey in the Niger Republic for an extraordinary economic community of West African states ECOWAS summit. He represents President Muhammadu Buhari at that meeting. The statement signed on Friday by the spokesperson of the Vice President Laolu Akonde explains that the summit will include other ECOWAS heads of states and governments and will review the ongoing situation in Guinea-Bissau. We're watching very closely, though, to see his return in any moment from now. We're expecting the Vice President to return back to the country. In the meantime, President Muhammadu Buhari earlier in September attended a one-day ECOWAS Heads of State and Government's Extraordinary Summit on Counterterrorism in Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso. Do the meetings add up more fire to the war against terrorism, kidnapping and other criminal vices plaguing the region? It's prime time here in Lagos, and this is State of the Nation. Welcome everyone in Nigeria and the rest of the world. I am Gimba Umar and this is State of the Nation. Today we begin with the efforts of the government to fight corruption. The Attorney General of the Federation and Minister of Justice, Abubakar Malami San, yesterday whittled down the powers of the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, the EFCC, and other anti-graft agencies as regards seizure of assets. That also includes the ICPC. The AGF also scrapped all assets recovery and tracing committees. The directive is contained in the Federal Republic of Nigeria official gazette titled Assets Tracing, Recovery and Management Regulations 2019, dated October 29. The AGF directed in Part 3, Section 5, Subsection 1 of the Gazette that all non-conviction-based forfeiture shall be conducted by his office. He ordered that where a non-conviction-based forfeiture produces, of course, their procedures arise, the law enforcement agency and anti-corruption agencies should transfer the matter to the office of the AGF. Let's analyze what this means to the fight against corruption, which is one of the biggest points agenda for this administration. It does have three of them. Do remember: the war against corruption, terrorism, and the economy. Joining me from our Abuja studios is Tochukwu Ohazurike. He's a lawyer, vast in the issues of corruption. I want to thank you so much indeed for joining us on State of the Nation. Also, Liboris Oshoma, a lawyer and human rights activist, joins me here from our studios in Lagos. Let me begin with you in our Abuja studios. It's clear, from day one, the government said it's determined to fight corruption. It's whittling down the powers of the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, the EFCC, and of course other anti-graft agencies as regards seizure of assets appropriate. Let me get your thoughts about this from our Abuja studios.
All right. Thank you, Gimba. The issues are simple. One would want to, first of all, ask the Attorney General of the Federation if the regulations and guidelines he has released are superior to the EFCC Act, ICPC Act, Police Act, and all other acts enacted by the National Assembly under which the anti-corruption agencies and law enforcement agencies are operating. Because if by this regulation and the adjoining guidelines, he has now altered the provisions of those laws made by the National Assembly. The average man on the street will ask, does he have the powers to do so? Can he alter, as an Attorney General seated in his office, alter the provisions of the law? Because the law empowers those agencies to do those jobs, including seizure of property of corrupt persons. But maybe because of the way the anti-corruption war has been going, and the loot coming from the anti-corruption war is bigger, and maybe the office of the Attorney General is not getting anything, then that is why this thing may have happened like this. Because, you know, there are two types of anti-corruption war, broadly divided. There are ways you can divide it, but let's look at two types: private sector corruption and public sector corruption. Now, zeroing in on the EFCC, you see that the EFCC now does only private sector corruption, particularly the internet fraud. And that is why in 2016, they had 189 convictions, 2017, 190, 2018, 202, and in 2019, as at October, they had 890. But if the chairman or the acting chairman of the EFCC will be bold to tell people how many of them are in the private sector corruption, you see that the differential in these numbers will be the number of the private sector corruption. Because when they catch these internet fraudsters, they don't usually put up any defense. They don't want to make case. They are all interested in give us the easiest punishment, take whatever you have caught us with, and let us go away and continue our business. That is exactly what has been happening in that light. And that is why when they celebrate that 200 billion has been recovered in 2019, they did not tell Nigerians that Abacha loot of 325 million is part of that 200 billion. One would be thinking maybe they had caught government officials or even the private sector, the internet fraudsters, and they have recovered 200 billion. The 325 million from Abacha loot, which is, if we convert to Naira, is over 100 billion, is part of that 200 billion they are celebrating, that they have recovered over 200 billion in 2019. So you see that in local parlance, when government begins to rack sense, something is wrong. When EFCC has now, instead of doing their job, they are now playing with figures, playing with semantics, and playing on the sensibilities of the Nigerian people.
Okay, we'll look at that further, but let me just toss it. Let me bring it back here to the Lagos studios and get your views, Liboris Oshoba, about this. Does this stance of the AGF, does it derail the progress so far made by the EFCC and the ICPC?
No, not at all. We agree that the office of the EFCC, to the best of their ability, and then to the best of the capacity, because they are also limited also. They've tried, but they also need to be regulated, to a very large extent, because, like we say, who police the police? So for me, the Attorney General should be commended for taking this step. Why he should be commended? Because you find out that in some cases, just recently, even in the news, just this week, you hear that there have been accusations and counter-accusations from Blade Construction Company, senior advocate of a Blade Construction Company, and then the ICPC on an asset, interim forfeiture of asset, because the lawyer to the defendant did accuse the ICPC of fraudulently obtaining forfeiture order, that in 2015, these same orders were fraudulently obtained from Justice Adeniyi. And when Justice Adeniyi became aware of the fact of the matter, that he gave, a contrary order and lambasted the ICPC. I think at that point, the Attorney General becoming aware of such, conflicting, orders would be ashamed of what had transpired in an agency that ordinarily should be superintending. Also in 2017, 2018, and then coming to 2019, after a judgment had been given in the matter, you still hear that, it's in the news that an order was obtained by ICPC, only for the next day the lawyer to the defendant to say, no, there is an appeal on this matter, and the ICPC had fraudulently gone to court to lie to the court, to deceive the court that, we didn't even see this party, even though they had interviewed them 5 times. So when you have issues like this, I think the office of the Attorney General, the best thing to do would be, just like we do at, state prosecution, where police investigate matters, they communicate to the office of the Attorney General to get clearance before you go further. I think what the Attorney General also is trying to do here is that for non-conviction assets, there is need to collaborate with the office of the Attorney General so that there won't be issues where people will have to use their personal...
Ohazurike in Abuja Studios said that do they have the powers? Does the AGF have the powers to ask the EFCC? Is he going contrary to the act that established the EFCC and the ICPC when he says that all those issues should be sent to his office?
Let me give you this same instance. The law that empowered the ICPC and the EFCC empowers them to forfeit asset temporarily for 1 year. But in the case of Blade Construction Company that is in the news, the ICPC for 2 years held on to the assets. And in matters like this, when you hear parties dragging the ICPC and they drag the office of the Attorney General also along in such matters that ordinarily the Attorney General, you presume that they ought to be aware because they are the chief law officer of the state. But in being also, talking about the laws now, the issue is the law had empowered the agency to so do. The same law also empowered the office of the Attorney General to supervise the activities of these agencies. Just like I listened to the Minister for Works recently. He said in awarding contracts, you have to also get clearance from the office of the Attorney General. This is the chief legal officer of the state. And so when you have agencies who are acting as gods and contrary to the provisions of the law, most especially when we are talking about disobedience to court orders now. And I think the best thing for the office of the Attorney General to do is to coordinate and rein in some of these agencies.
We'll get back to the issue of disobedience of court orders, but let me come back to you, Mr. Hazurike. In the statement of the AGF, he did mention Section 5 of that statement, that all this non-conviction-based forfeiture shall be conducted by the Office of the Attorney General of the Federation. The key word there being non-conviction. Do you believe that the courts or counsels in courts are compromised? We have heard of cases of gratification of officers of law. Could this be a valid point?
Now, I think there are two issues in fighting corruption like this. One, recovering what has been lost, and two, stopping the man who has done that. But when you look at the regulation released by the Attorney General of the Federation, you see that there is a scramble and that the focus is for the recovery of assets, not even stopping the people or acting as a deterrent for those who are in the process of committing such crimes. Because the effort so far is not on conviction, but on recovery of assets. And if you ask yourself, which should be more important to the ordinary citizen? Is it to recover the assets and the criminal walks away freely, or to hold the criminal down and then the assets will come out? Because we can recover Abacha loot today because Abacha is no more. EFCC was able to hand over one of the buildings belonging to former Chief of Defense Staff, Alex Bade, I think Chief of... to Voice of Nigeria because he is no more. So when you recover a little of this property and you allow the people to walk away, it's based on negotiation, and such things are not what the government should concentrate its effort on when it is a government that is supposed to fight corruption. That effort of government in that context should be to arrest everybody who has been found wanting. But when you now see that the concentration of the recovery of these properties are no longer persons in government, but private sector corruption, you see that why that scramble is there. That is, you can just see through it because the effort is on private sector corruption, no longer on public sector corruption. Because if it is public sector corruption, EFCC would not have filed applications in court saying that they will not investigate the chairman of the ruling party, Adams Oshomole. Look at what is happening in the office of the vice president. Up till yesterday, his spokesman was still saying things that the list that has been released of his tax staff today contradicts and puts a lie to what he said yesterday, that there were no officers of the vice president's office that were sacked. 2 months down the line, the vice president is yet to sue Mr. Timmy Frank, who he said defamed him. So when you look at these things and see what, you see that there is corruption going on in the office of the vice president, which the presidency does not want to open. You know, during his absence, 2017, they tied it. They said, "Oh, there's one president."
Are you saying that the presidency is concealing? Are you saying that the presidency is concealing information on corruption that is taking place in the president's and the vice president's office?
Now look at the issues. Did you listen to the statement of the special advisor to the president on social investment program, Mrs. Owais? He was telling the EFCC to investigate the social investment programs in the conditional cash transfer. She said, one, there are 3 ways they were dealing with the people. That when they give 10,000 to some local people, the poorest of the poor, that as much as 8,000 was taken away by the persons who were supposed to hand over this money. She said,
okay,
in some instances,
we're running short of time. My apologies. We're going to go on a short break. My apologies. Let's quickly go on a short break. When we come back, we'll pick up from that point where you left it. And I will also ask about this very important question of whether or not the court's orders are being obeyed or disobeyed in some instances. Join us again. Welcome back to State of the Nation. Mr. Hazarike, I did mention just before we went on break that the issue of these court orders, have they been disobeyed in some instances, do you think? What will be the repercussion of court orders being disobeyed as it is against the rule of law?
Well, I think Nigeria for now is in the era where the government and government agencies practically choose the court orders they want to obey, but not just in the anti-corruption issues, but in all other issues. Because, like my colleague with you, Liboros, said, in the blade construction matter, if Justice Adeniyi had reversed his order, why would ICPC continue to hold on to the properties of blade construction? So you see that the government chooses what it wants to obey, it obeys that, and the one that does not suit the purpose of government will just treat it with complete unconcern and complete disdain. And that is what we have seen. So if it's about disobedience to court orders, it's a normal practice for this government. And it's just unfortunate that the judiciary has not risen to the challenge to put a stop to the issues of disobedience to court orders. And it's a very, very dangerous trend that we must stop it one way or the other.
It does seem to suggest to anyone watching that perhaps the courts are not handling this properly, as both of you have said, but there are other cases. Let's look at some specifics. For instance, now we did have the case of the former president of the Nigerian Senate, Dr. Bukola Saraki, when he said that the courts were misled to believe that his properties should be seized. That's one case, maybe very similar to the one that you mentioned. But what does this mean to the war on corruption? Because everybody seems to be confused on whether or not the EFCC or the anti-graft agencies are going about this the right way. If prosecutions have not been made, then why go to the media? Yeah,
please quickly permit me to put this in perspective. The ICPC ordinarily is supposed to investigate, financial crimes within government sectors. The EFCC is for financial crime, both private and public. But you find that in situations that we all know that are very similar now, the ICPC dabbles into areas of the even EFCC's jurisdiction, like handling private matters where people now begin to use, the ICPC to pursue personal vendetta, like we saw Bono Obla's panel do. And so that's why, to this extent, you find out that also not just the judiciary, the legal practitioners disciplinary committee need to also rise up in situations where lawyers are retained in a matter and they intentionally, fraudulently mislead the court to obtain fraudulent orders for and on behalf of either government or their client is something that should be frowned at. Like the case of Saraki that you mentioned, his lawyers had consistently submit that these allegations were fraudulent, these orders were fraudulently obtained. And the most baffling part for me was the blade construction matter that I told you I have followed consistently from 2015 till date. From 2015 up to 2017, the ICPC investigated and held on to those assets. And in 2017, the ICPC approached Justice Adeniyi's court to say that they could not locate the office of Blade Construction Company, that in fact they had invited the parties, that the company is non-existent, even though they had interviewed Mrs. Ojuko Momo on 5 occasions with her clients. And then when they obtained that temporary order for forfeiture, and then when the finally responded, and the judge was shocked, was taken aback as to the fact that she had shown cause even before the ICPC. And then Justice Adeniyi overruled himself. And subsequently, when that was going on, the same ICPC, disobedience of court order, eventually went back and said they want to reopen the investigation. And then these parties approached the court. Justice Binta Yako gave another order in 2019, July 2019. And while the ICPC had appealed that order, they now approached the same Justice Adeniyi again, saying that, yes, there is a court order, but we want the matter, and so grant us another order to forfeit the assets temporarily. So when you have such, flip-flop, and there is nothing, nobody is doing anything about it, what you are indirectly telling the international community that you're trying to woo to come do business with you is that you don't obey court orders. And like my colleague Wazirike has rightly said, a situation where government chooses which order to obey, or government agencies chooses which order to obey. And that's where I would commend the Attorney General at this stage to say, look, where there need to be sanity in this asset recovery, because this mad rush to recover assets, without following due process. At the end of the day, if not properly handle, my boomerang, I might create a bad image for the company. And so to that extent, I also would want to commend the EFCC to some extent. There are gains, yes, we agree. There are gains, but we still have a long way to go. It shouldn't just be about asset recovery, like Wazirike has said.
So what should be the quick solutions?
The quick solution should be also, let us find ways of plugging loopholes. It is not about, what we are doing now is reactionary. There should be, we also should create opportunities for being proactive. You plug loopholes. And then, so that you don't wait for people to steal, and then you come, you chase shadows, and then chase innocent business people simply because they have relationship with some persons that have handled, government offices at one time or the other. You don't build a society like that. The essence of our courtroom, law regulates society. And that's why, no matter how stubborn, how dictatorial the president of America can be, he can never violate a court order. You saw what happened in London, where the moment the Supreme Court gave order that the Prime Minister had no power to shut down the Parliament, they didn't need to look at the body language of the Prime Minister. The Speaker of the Parliament immediately reconvened the Parliament. But here, we begin to look at the body language of either the president or the body language of somebody up there. It shouldn't be.
Those are purely sentiments.
No, really. Look at the case of Showere also.
But let me get to hear from Mr. Wazirike again in terms of looking at the solutions to try to curb on these excesses, if you will, at some point. But what would you prefer as solutions to some of these seizure instances, just to make sure that we get it right and the judiciary is not seen to be one that is a little bit loose in the process?
One, anybody that is found wanting must be publicly shamed and punished. Where government and agencies of government shield officers of government who are found wanting and now make blanket statements or make blanket principles. If there are instances of persons in EFCC or ICPC or any other law enforcement agency fiddling with property that has been recovered from any person, you don't just because of that now make blanket rules that will affect even those who have done their jobs diligently without punishing, at least for the first instance, the persons who have done wrong. So this government must learn to punish its officers who have done wrong. This government has a very poor record of punishing its officers who have done wrong. They have to change that, and so that people will see that you are not above the law by mere being involved in this government, because that is what it so seems as today. Now, there is a knee-jerk approach to issues of anti-corruption. Reactionary, like my colleague has said, is very reactionary. Government must sit down, and if you look at the regulations very deeply, you will see that those regulations were very quickly thought out just to solve an issue. Not that it projected into certain things that hadn't happened and now brought out those regulations to check them. They are just reactionary issues in the past. Let the Attorney General go ahead and conduct a probe of all properties that have been recovered and tell Nigerians where they are presently. Nigerians will be shocked at what will be found out. So these are the ways, so that when you do these things, you will now punish every one of them who has been involved. You remember, there were allegations like this against a former chairman of the EFCC, that there were monies recovered that are missing. Nothing happened about that. So these are the issues.
Okay, that's a good place to let it rest from you, so that we can also get from the Boros in just 30 seconds. What more do you have to say to that?
In the last, the former Minister of Finance, what's this woman's name, the lady with the NYC issue. Remember, at a point she had running battle with these anti-corruption agencies, where what was said to have been recovered was far higher than what was in the coffers. What you have is situations where fictitious accounts are tagged, just to give the court the impression that there's so much money out there in the hands of private individuals. And then the court gives orders. then only 4. In the actual sense, where you now confront these agencies in the court, you find out that what is actually in those accounts is not up to a 1/10 of what was mentioned in the news and even in the court papers. And so what eventually gets to government, it's a patry sum. And that's why, SERAP and some other organizations have been asking, please declare, let us know what you have recovered so far.
It's a good place to let it rest. So much indeed for talking to us. Tochukwu Huazarike, a lawyer, vast in the issues of corruption from our Abuja studios. Many thanks indeed for talking to us, as well as Liboris Oshoma, a lawyer and human rights activist. Many thanks for talking to us, and to you for watching, being part of the show. Thank you for watching. This is State of the Nation. I am Gimba Omar. Bye for now.